who no threshold or boundary can separate, who is a bridge, a causeway, an ever-present help. Amen. We all live in a constant flow of natural experiences of boundaries. Just think of our skin, a boundary between ourselves and others. Sunrises, sunsets, beautiful, a boundary between night and day, day and night. Death is a boundary between the mortal and the immortal. An experience of transitioning from a parental home to one's own home, a boundary. A river like the one that separates Parkhurst and Victory Park, that's a boundary. Also, unavoidably all around us are synthetic boundaries, wearing a face mask, border posts between countries, fences demarcating properties. Boundaries are in many ways neutral until we, and it tends to be we as in human beings, ascribe some sort of value to them or create a sensate experience or thought process around them. Some boundaries are more open and porous so that there's freedom of movement backwards and forwards. Other boundaries, once crossed, often mark a point of no return. And still others are terror-filled. Others mark edges of growth. Some boundaries are jolly intimidating, and others are inviting and evolutionary. Many boundary forms and experiences are much more complex than we have the time to explore at present, but at least we can start to ask the questions, to start the process of thinking, to look at the reality that crossing over boundaries may take time, long or short, and to check where it is that God wants us to cross over and when. Why all this talk about boundaries? Well, because Jacob stopped at a place which for him he didn't realize was a boundary, and it became a boundary not only geographically but also in his life experience and story. It was a boundary between Canaan, which represents his past, where he has come from, and is the crossover into Mesopotamia, representing a future that he is moving into. And in this place, he sleeps and has another boundary experience. He dreams, which is that bridge very often between heaven and earth. But what is Jacob doing so very far from home? Well, if you read Jacob's full story, you know that there was some very ugly sibling rivalry and jealousy between himself and his slightly older twin, Esau, not helped at all by the parents who fed into their behavior and the division between these brothers by how they treated the brothers. The father favored Esau, the mother favored Jacob. And things really came to a head when Jacob, egged on by his mother, completely overstepped all bounds and through deception stole Esau's birthright as the older twin. Blessedly, the father, Isaac, for once, acted wisely. And he sent Jacob away to his in-laws in a neighboring country, hopefully to choose a bride, marry, settle down, create his own family and all the attendant responsibilities. Perhaps there was also a prayer in the parents' hearts that this separation, this distance geographically and over time, would in some way bring healing and reconciliation to the broken relationship of these two brothers. So this is a pivotal moment in Jacob's life, and it is one of breathless suspension. Will Jacob go back to all that he has known, to the safety and provision of his ancestral home? Or will he, in all his aloneness, uncertainty, vulnerability, go forward knowing that nothing will ever be the same, quite in the same way again. As he teeters on the edge of this emotional borderland, he decides to sleep on it. And he's very blessed because he is able to sleep. Many of us, when we're experiencing the threshold of a crisis or needing to make a decision, we really struggle to sleep. But he sleeps. And what does God do while Jacob is asleep? Does God tell Jacob what choice to make? Or if he makes this choice, this will be the outcome. If he makes that choice, that will be the outcome. So that by having some sort of information, Jacob can make some sort of informed decision. Well, as we know, God does none of that. God actually says, and this is just a portion of verse 15 in that Genesis chapter, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. It is amazing, isn't it, to think that God's presence is not dependent on us making the right choices or being at the right place in the right time. This reassurance is something which we really need to clasp close to our hearts, especially when we are on a boundary, wavering between various choices. Borders, be they exterior or interior, are often places of theophany, and we need to expect and anticipate a breaking in of God. Every choice that we face, whether behavioral, emotional, spiritual, professional, every choice represents some form of boundary which we need to cross. But how do we know where? How do we know when? And is this the right boundary, or is there another boundary that God wants us to cross over? What are the signs? What can we do to help us to discern? Well, here are just two simple ways in which to test the veracity of a particular boundary and whether God wants us to cross over it. Firstly, by crossing it, are we able to get a feeling of whether, if we cross over, this is going to divide us? We're going to enter into a place of dualism, of either or. Or is it in response to an invitation that is positive, that will bring new growth, and that has the space to hold both our past and whatever the future brings? Because that is God. God brings the integration. Secondly, does this boundary have a prophetic element to it which will evolve us into greater love, understanding, and awareness? Because that prophetic element is always of God if it contains those three things: growth in love, understanding, and awareness. So, Jacob, in this case, does cross over this boundary with God as both his bridge and his companion. And in so doing, he steps out of his brother's shadow and loosens the apron strings of his mother that have been tied so tightly to him. Truly, he is stepping forward into potential new life and the chance to evolve into a better, more whole human being. We know that it's not instantaneous, that it takes time. He had to do the traveling, both interiorly and exteriorly. This is where we are. Let's not rush the process. Let's ask God to help us to recognize the various boundaries in various aspects of our lives, to know when to cross over, and to check using those discernment points. Now, this was not the first time, nor was it the last boundary that Jacob faced throughout his life, but each time what he did try, he didn't always get it right. He tried to choose to face it with God and to face it with the truth about who he was and is in that context. Not always did he manage to do it with dignity and aplomb, but who of us ever has? But he tried. Can we give ourselves permission to do likewise? So in conclusion, I'd like to end with a quote that is written by Margaret Silf in her book, Sacred Spaces. And this is what she writes, which takes us even deeper into our own ponderings around transitions in boundaries and thresholds. Nothing can diminish the mystery of our being, because it is infinitely larger than anything we can think or imagine. However, our perpetual longing to reach into the core of that mystery can be frustrated by our equally persistent habit of creating false certainties. Every time we cross a threshold, a boundary in our lives, we are passing beyond one of these walls of certainty, and we are penetrating just a little further into the mystery at the heart of ourselves and of all creation. Amen.